tyrosine because it'd be worthless. So we don't give people L-tyrosine, we give people L-DOPA, which is this. There's a picture in the book that has side effects that it's actually just good to be aware of what these side effects are. On page 104, if you give your patient L-DOPA, some of it will be converted to dopamine, and you're going to get signs of dopamine toxicity, which is on page 104. It gives you an illustration of what the toxicity is. You can get flushing, you can get nausea, you can get tachycardia, you can get hypotension from stimulation of dopamine receptors. So if you give someone L-DOPA, some of that L-DOPA will get transported across, and it goes to L-DOPA here. And then by giving a lot of L-DOPA here, in the basal ganglia, your patient has Parkinson's, you bypass that first-rate living step. So when their basal ganglia see all this L-DOPA, they make more dopamine, so they make more dopamine, okay? So you can give L-DOPA to someone, and goes across, passes the blood-brain barrier, goes from the brain, the periphery into the brain, and it's converted to dopamine, okay? Now the treatment for Parkinson's, all treatment for Parkinson has L-DOPA, okay? There's different combinations. You can give L-DOPA by itself, or you can give it in combination with something else. But all treatment for Parkinson's will have L-DOPA. The dopamine here the L-DOPA here can be metabolized by COMT. Remember, you're giving this PO, so it's not going into cells, it's going into plasma circulating. And extracellular, the enzyme would be COMT that would be metabolizing in the outside the brain. So some of the L-DOPA could be metabolized to methoxytyramine here, and some of the L-DOPA can go to dopamine. Right? So one way, there's two ways that you can have more L-DOPA get across, or there's several ways. You can give a big dose of L-DOPA, but you're going to get more side effects. Or you can give drugs that will block the breakdown of L-DOPA to compounds. You don't want it broken down to dopamine, because that's only, dopamine gives you complications, from the tachycardia and the dopamine side effects, and it takes away the drug that you want to go across here. So there's a drug called carbidopa. What they do, this is L-DOPA. They change L-DOPA a little bit. They put a methyl group here, and they put another amine group here. So they made a drug that kind of looks like L-DOPA, but it has a little difference, okay? You see that? So what happens is that when this enzyme can either have an L-DOPA bind to it and then get converted to dopamine, or it can have, when in this drug, carbidopa, here, wait. So, okay, you have a Parkinson's patient, and you're going to give them a drug for their Parkinson, and you decide that you can't give tyrosine, because when that gets across, it's not going to go to dopamine. You can't give them dopamine or others, so you're going to give them L-DOPA. So you're going to give your patient L-DOPA, okay? So your patient patient L-dopa, the L-dopa goes into the brain, is taken up by the blood-brain barrier, it gets converted to dopamine, and their Parkinson's symptoms get better. Okay? But the problem is, a lot of this L-dopa goes to other stuff here. So besides helping their Parkinson's symptoms, some of it's going to dopamine, and your patient may have flushing, they may have headaches, they may have GI symptoms, they might have tachycardia, and besides producing dopamine and causing those side effects, you're having to give more of this because so much more of your dopamine, of your L-dopa is going to dopamine. So you think, I wish I could stop this from happening. And the way you stop it is you give L-dopa, but then you give this other drug, carbidopa. Okay, and carbidopa is very similar to dopa. Okay, it just has this CH3 group and that NH2 group. So it's very similar to this. So what happens, this enzyme sees this drug, it binds to it, and then it quits working. It kind of poisons that enzyme. So when you give carbidopa, because it poisons, it stops this enzyme from working, you block the conversion of the L-dopa to dopamine, right? So less of your dopamine, so you can get, you can give a smaller dose of L-dopa, less will go here, more will go here, your patient will have less side effects, okay? And the combination of L-dopa and carbidopa is what? Cinnamon. Have you guys ever taken care of anybody with cinnamon? So you give them L-dopa, and you're giving them something that blocks the metabolism of L-dopa into something that you don't want. Is carbidopa an amino acid? No. So it doesn't get transported here, so it doesn't have any effects in the brain. It just keeps the peripheral conversion of L-dopa to dopamine from happening. Okay. There's two other drugs you can give. I wrote these down. You can give drugs that will block COMT also, and that way more of your L-dopa stays as L-dopa and is not metabolized. So you could give L-dopa by itself. You could, everything that you would use for Parkinson's involves giving L-dopa. You could give L-dopa with carbidopa, or you could give L-dopa, carbidopa, and something that inhibits COMT. And does it kind of make sense how this works? By keeping this from being broken down, you get less side effects from the dopamine. You can get by with a smaller dose, and more of it gets across here. Okay. Now, once the L-dopa goes across to into the brain, L-dopa is converted to dopamine, and again, this doesn't pass the blood-brain barrier. So this, even though it's inhibited here, it's not inhibited here. And then dopamine is metabolized like dopamine normally is. So you have dopamine. And you can metabolize it 10-AO. Either way, dopamine can either be metabolized by COMT first, and then MAO, or MAO first, and then COMT,
DMT